Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pathfinder, a podcast by Payload, the leading digital media company in the space industry. I'm your host, Mo Islam, and my guests today are Jed McCaleb, founder, and Max Haot, CEO of VAST, a startup based out of Long Beach, California, building commercial space stations. According to their schedule, VAST should be the first commercial free-flying space station with their targeted launch in summer of 2025. We have a lot to unpack, so let's jump right in. Jed, Max, very excited to have both of you on the show here today.
Yeah,
Mo.
excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, Mo.
So, Jed, is this your first time talking about VAST on a podcast, or have you had public conversation before?
I've talked about it a little bit, but yeah, this is the meatiest one for sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm very excited. We're all excited to hear your side of the story as well as Max's. So maybe just to kind of kick things off, you were the one that, you were the brainchild behind the VAST story. Maybe tell us a little bit about, your own maybe career journey for 2 seconds, just what you did before, and then how you ended up building and wanting to create VAST.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a programmer by background. I've been programming since I was a little kid. I've started many software companies. I've always been super interested in space, and theoretically, but I hadn't ever done anything in it practically. So, but I've always just thought that it's really important for humans to get off the planet and out into the solar system. Like, the world would be much better if there's like billions of people living out beyond the Earth. I think it's obviously economically beneficial, but it's also good from like kind of like a psychic standpoint where it's like now the Earth feels very zero sum, and I think the way to break that is to give us a frontier. Like, people kind of need a frontier. We've had it through our whole existence until very, very recently, right? And so I just think for like the human psyche, it's just better to have that. And so I always kind of told myself, like, if I was ever successful, then I would do something like large and ambitious in space and like help us, like, obviously it's a long way to go from where we are today to this like far future of billions of people in space. But I wanted to kind of like help us like take steps in that direction. And so when I kind of stepped back from my last company, I was thinking about what I could do and kind of fell upon the idea, like, it seems like the next step after getting mass cheaply to orbit, which SpaceX is largely solving, is human habitation. And so VAST is kind of set out to do that.
So space was always on your mind, even from what you were doing before.
Yeah, I mean, I would always kind of like be reading books about, like how to mine asteroids, or like how to do all this other stuff, like, like these like very thick like technical books, and like people, like my friends would kind of make fun of me about it, but I was like, eventually I'm going to do this. And so like here we are. Yeah.
But why, of all things to start, you pick one of the most CapEx heavy things to do in space, at least from the outside looking in? Like, why why start a space station business? Or is it really, at the end of the day, I guess, you have this vision of like, humans need to habitate space and for a lot of different reasons. But was how much of that sort of initial vision of VAST was like, hey, this is a business. Like, I need to be like, I can make a lot of money doing this.
Well, I think, so there is one of the challenges with space, historically, and even still now, is that like there's this huge chasm to cross, right? There's like, it's to do anything meaningful up there, it really does take a lot of like capital expense, right? And there's not that many people that are willing to take that kind of risk and do that kind of thing. And so I kind of felt obligated to do that because, again, like I said, I do think it's like super important. And so, but it feels like one of these things where like it is super expensive, but if you put enough money to do it, you will achieve it, right? And so, and at that point, it will be a viable business and lucrative and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think, like it's it's not like I'm not really doing VAST to make more money, but VAST needs to be able to make money for it to be successful, right? So like I've done pretty well, but me alone, I don't have enough money to like seed like everything that we want to do at VAST. Like, it has to be this economically viable thing that other people are going to want to invest in, and like it's going to have to like kick off its own returns so it can like reinvest them in what its mission is and things like that. So it's absolutely important, essential that it is like a viable business. But yeah, so I did definitely think about that when I was like, what will actually work in space? Like, there's lots of things, I could build lots of things, but I was like, okay, what is something that would eventually be this flywheel, like this economic engine that could like have a life of its own? Yeah.
Right. So viable business. So enters Max. Now, Max, you've built a number of viable businesses, right, before VAST. Maybe tell us about how you ended up now becoming commander-in-chief?
Well, first I didn't enter. I was invited by Jed through some lucky circumstance. But yeah, my background and career, I was an internet entrepreneur. Didn't go to college. Started working when I was 17, and have been specialized more in the internet and video. I built a first division of a company in London that I sold to Verizon and moved to the US. I'm obviously an American dream type immigrant person, so that was always part of the plan. My first stop was in New York. I created a company called Livestream after my earnout, which we sold to Vimeo. And had the first hardware experience there, building a consumer electronic live streaming camera. I've been basically wanting to pivot my career into space exploration or contributing to space exploration for probably since early 2005 or six. And really from the same mission that or interest that Jed has is to see a future where we have a frontier where we are contributing to billions of people living in space, and also we are not thinking about the problems of the earth and that we need less population and we need to decelerate, but more an expansionist kind of mindset. So contributing to space was my personal answer to that. I also came across SpaceX very early on and what Elon was doing, and was like, oh wow, if I make enough money, I will be able to pivot my career into space. So 10 years later, I started Launcher, which was a launch company, basically building a small rocket to build a bigger one eventually and a reusable one. You know the story. And throughout the fundraising process, I had the chance to meet Jed to talk about funding Launcher. And so Jed had started Vast maybe just less than a year ago, about a year ago, as a small team of, I think when we closed, it was about 40 people, but I think when we met, maybe 10 at the time. And it built an amazing team of engineers with a lot of human spaceflight experience, obviously chose human spaceflight for Vast, created a roadmap in the focus on artificial gravity and leveraging the Starship era to build unprecedented big space station that spin for artificial gravity. At that time, Jed basically said, "Oh, I'm paraphrasing you, but I'm impressed with what you've done with so little capital at Launcher, and I'm looking for somebody to help accelerate and scale Vast and run it." For anyone involved that has an ambition in space, human spaceflight is the pinnacle of the ambition. It took nearly 20 years even for SpaceX to put the first person in space from their founding. So what Jed offered is really a shortcut to go straight to space exploration, an amazing opportunity that I'm very passionate about, but also the resource behind it in a way that is you just can't do, as he mentioned, with fundraising step by step. 10 million, then 20, then 100. And so we found a deal that we were both happy. The investors were happy. The team was happy, and we did the acquisition in February last year. So I've been at Vast first as president for about a year and 3 months, 4 months. Things are going fast. And last August, I was appointed, I guess, building trust with Jed as CEO, which was sort of the original intention, but we needed to work together for a bit. So, anything I said wrong there, Jed?
No, that's basically the story. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask Jed if he could confirm that story. So there we go. Max, so since taking on the role, what's been sort of your initial call it primary objective, right? Obviously, there's a huge long-term goal that you guys both align on, but what is your sort of like how would you define your current sort of primary objective?
Well, the first step, Jed and I started to work on with the team on the stepping stone strategy, right? We had the long-term goal for us, which is the artificial gravity space station, so 105-meter long by 7-meter diameter, a spinning stick at 4 rotations per minute. And if you achieve that, you can have artificial gravity at both ends. You can have lunar and Mars gravity and also microgravity in the center. But if you objectively look at it, it will take more than 10 billion in more than a decade to build that, and we had to also wait for Starship to be ready. So really, when I joined, we started to work on, okay, but how can we create a stepping stone roadmap to get to that vision? And you were mentioning economic viability. We really believe that the biggest opportunity in the space station market is obviously NASA. NASA will not be our sole customer. We'll not have 100% of our revenue and viability from NASA, but NASA is and the U.S. government is happy to be an anchor customer. So that means tens of percent, but less than 50% of your revenue. And they are running a competition called Commercial Layer Destination, where they are expected to choose a winner to replace the ISS, which is due to deorbit in 2030, in 2026. So the first thing we did, back to your question, is say, okay, should we really win this? And we were like, yeah, if we win this, we will be around for decades. If we don't, we'll find another solution. There's an exciting market, but we feel it's really important. And then we took a step back and said, what can we do to make sure we win it? Because NASA had already selected 4 partners, and we were sort of already behind from a procurement point of view. And that's when Haven 1 came. Okay, let's not wait for Starship. Let's build a Falcon 9 a space station. When we are ready, SpaceX will be ready. And let's actually build, launch, and have a crew of 4 visit for 10 days and come back home safely. And we basically felt if we do all of this before NASA and the US government is to make a procurement decision, we will be the world's only commercial space station company and operator. And we think it will be impossible for them to, or we hope at least, to not at least give us, half of the contract. So that's the first thing we did, is to not the long-term strategy was set, but the short-term strategy, and now we've been executing it basically. So,
Jed, have you built a hardware company in the past?
No, this is my first foray into hardware for sure.
Yeah. What are some of the differences, kind of initial, like outside of the capital intensive part of the two sides, but maybe talk a little bit about what's been your experience so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's been super interesting. I'm an engineer by background, but a software engineer, and so it's still engineering. It's just like you kind of have a different set of constraints. Like now you're constrained by physics rather than like the weird things computers can do. So it's been a cool thing to like think through and like work on. Obviously, like hardware is way less forgiving. Like software, you can just make a new pull request and like fix problems, whereas hardware you might have to throw away like hundreds of thousands of dollars of stuff if you want to pivot, right? So you have to be a little more methodical than you are, or like careful than you are with software. But I'm learning a lot, and it's been super fun, honestly. So
I'm not hearing any regrets so far. So
no. Well, we're still early. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick step back. So we're talking a little bit about the opportunity, the market opportunity. Maybe let's try to throw some dollars at this, right? What is the market opportunity for a free flying space station? How much of the current sort of ISS spend do you think you guys can capture?
Yeah, I mean, so it's really hard to say, just because there's never been a commercial station before, like this is obviously very new. And also a lot of what VAST is predicated on is the fact that Starship will be working, right? And if Starship actually starts to fly and it's able to get like mass to orbit, like 100 times cheaper than we can do currently, it's just really going to change the whole economy up there. And we're betting basically that there'll be lots more like enterprise and lots of other things going on, and a lot of those things will need humans in the loop or benefit from humans in the loop, and we'll be able to provide that. So it's really, right now, I think what is the ISS probably spends like $3 billion a year or something. Like NASA spends about $3 billion a year, I think, keeping ISS afloat. They want to spend less than that. That's why one of the reasons why they're doing this CLD thing. But that's kind of the order of magnitude it is right now. But I think it's going to be much, much bigger once the space economy starts to really balloon post Starship. Is kind of what we're betting on, I think. I don't know if you have something to add.
No,
so maybe Max.
No, I was going to say the current NASA budget is about $4 billion, and their goal is to spend $2 billion so that they can reassign resource, financial resource to Artemis. So that's at least the current, and we recommend that they have 2 providers, at least at the beginning stage, before they go all in on one space station. So, and that includes transportation, a lot of the fees to SpaceX. So you're talking at least $1 billion a year type contract, which is not obviously all gross profit, but that's just the NASA piece, right? And we also see market demand, proven market demand in international space agencies that are flying, citizens for the first time, doing experiment and science, also private individual. And then the whole holy grail of in-space manufacturing, which is still very nascent, but could be the killer application that can on its own justify building a space station factory in space, and every month. So we'll be part of the people that unlock that. It's not yet a proven market, but it's certainly the one with the most hope for the next few decades. And then you have also private individual that are part of it at a certain level. I mean, it's still in the hundreds of millions of dollars in the market today. And not yet in volume, but we hope as transportation costs are reduced and space station costs are reduced, that they will play a larger part of the economy as it goes.
So I do want to ask about your approach versus others, but maybe before we jump into that, let's talk about Haven One, right? It's the first station that you're putting up into space. I think in 2025, if I'm not mistaken, summer of 2025. Talk a little bit about the approach to Haven One, the progress, and sort of key milestones that you've achieved so far.
So the key to Haven One is a minimum viable product space station, right? How can we do it in a record time, probably 5 times cheaper, 5 times faster than anyone has done, and how can we do it before NASA makes this decision in 2026? And so in doing that, we talked about it. We first down selected to focus on Falcon 9. It's a single module space station. It's a single port. It is actually a limited lifetime space station. It does not have cargo resupply capability, so it will be on orbit for 3 years. And during that time, we expect to have 4 10-day expeditions for a crew of 4. So obviously, VAS-1 will be the first one shortly after we launch. And then during the 3 years, we expect to do a three additional one. And that's pretty much a feature. We've recently announced that we will have Starlink internet laser, the first space station to have a deal with SpaceX. And also we agreed with SpaceX that we will be able to offer it to NASA in our CLD Haven 2 station. And so that's obviously unique and very different. Now, if you look at the Haven 1 product compared to a Dragon free flyer, where you, like Inspiration 4, Jared Isaacman orbited the Earth for 3 days with 4 people, but didn't actually go to the ISS or any other destination. When you dock to Haven 1, firstly, you can stay much longer because we have all the consumables, the water, the oxygen, the food, and other CO2 scrubbing and so on. So you can stay about easily 5 times longer with a marginal extra fee, but also you get sleeping station and you get 5 times the usable volume instead of being crammed into a Dragon. So it's even though it's a small space station, single module, it's a major upgrade to anything out there for Dragon, other than the ISS, which has its own limited supply and restrictions for non-governmental astronauts. And so we are building it. We've just announced on our website the creation of our primary structure Pathfinder, where we proved all of the key geometries in our aluminum primary structure, all built in-house in the USA. Originally, Boeing built a lot of the ISS module, but I don't believe they have that capability up and running anymore. And a lot of the other competitors are relying on Europe and vendors to do that. So we are building it in the US and we're building it in-house. Raw material comes in, space station primary structure. And so you can expect that at the end of the summer, early fall, we will have a qualification version of that. So that's the full Haven 1 space station primary structure with the window and the hatch. And it will undergo pressure and load testing in our Mojave test site facility. So that will happen in the fall. Integration is due to start in December or shortly after, also in our facilities. So that's the moment where all of the subsystems, the computers, the CMGs, the tanks, the propulsion, everything gets outfitted and bolted inside and tested. And then we plan next summer a test campaign at the Plumbrook NASA facility, which is the largest facility to do this kind of vibration test, acoustic and thermal vacuum test. Then it will go to the launch site and launch on a reusable Falcon 9. August is our no earlier than date that is public. And I can tell you we are tracking very close to that, just a little bit after, and definitely in 2025 to launch it.
Great, that's super exciting. Wait, so did I hear you earlier correctly? You said you guys are building most of the components, if not all the components, in house.
Yeah, that's actually when we started the program. The approach is outsource if you can, right? The program had a 2-year time to fly, and when we were with the Haven team and Jed, basically a key brief is this is the constraint, the time, reduce the feature to fit in that time. Obviously, safety is number one, and so that we cannot compromise. and outsource every piece we can. So, but it's actually, it turns out you can't outsource many things if you need the hardware in a year. So we did succeed at outsourcing and partnering on propulsion with Tom Mueller, the famed propulsion head of propulsion at SpaceX. That now is a new company called Impulse. So they're doing all of our COPV tanks for Eclipse, so for life support, for propulsion, all of our 48 thrusters. We partnered with a company in Spain called DHV for our solar panel, and we partnered with others on smaller piece. But most of the other system, whether it's a flight computer, a reaction wheel CMG, valves, primary structure we discussed, secondary structure, internal. Most of them we are designing in-house, manufacturing, so machining in-house, and we also testing. We have vibe table and we have thermal vacuum systems, and that's really the only way to go this fast. Is if you do vertical integration and you have a team that can design this component and they have the tools to do it. So we wish we could outsource more, but that's pretty much 90% is probably vertically integrated at this point.
How are you thinking about materials used, especially from the perspective of construction and safety, right? So like obviously the structure has never been to space. How are you thinking about that piece of it?
I mean, one of the things that while we didn't win the phase one award for CLD, we were not around. We didn't bid 2 years ago for NASA. We won a contract called CCSC2, which gave us access to all of the expertise, all the design of NASA. We can do technical interchange meeting. They are part of all of our primary design reviews, CDRs, and we are like one of the winners, but we're just not getting the money that was associated, but we're getting all the experience and the information. The other piece is that VAST is 400 people, and we have, if you aggregate the number of human spaceflight mission that our team has been part of, they are in the hundreds, and so many people have worked on Dragon and have other crewed experience, even back to the shuttle at VAST. And so between the NASA information that is public, the one that we can access, and the experience of our team, we know the state of the art of what you should do in materials. So the primary structure is in aluminum, 2219, and that's the most module other than the Russian one or in that material. So nothing new. And then, for everything inside, we have an amazing human factors team that is experienced, whether it's, clothing and material and fire suppression. And but it does not, that's not an area of innovation right now. It's just an area of following safety standards that SpaceX is imposing on us that we want, which are a subset of usual NASA safety standards, and making sure we are safe and compliant. And we also have a safety and mission assurance team and all the process that you'd expect to ensure you have a safe space station and safe flights for your crew.
So I'm going to hand you guys some boxing gloves for a second. So imaginary boxing gloves. So let's talk about the competition. Usually when I ask this question to folks, I think founders and executives skirt around the question and they give me like, our competition's awesome and they're great and there's room for multiple players. So maybe that's true, but maybe like let's kind of maybe let's try to think about this critically, right? What do you think about the approach of the competitors out there? Obviously the main ones, Starlab, Orbital Reef, and Axiom. How did you think about their approach versus your approach and sort of that go-to market? Because if my dates are correct, like based on the summer 2025 timeline, you're going to be first out of all of them.
Yep. Axiom is announced.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jed. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, we're definitely, like from the beginning, our goal was to be, like very fast. I think one of the lessons from SpaceX is that the faster you can go and the more you can iterate, it's actually ends up being cheaper and your missions end up being more successful because you just have more experience essentially, right? And obviously that has limits with human spaceflight. We can't just like blow up module after module, but I think leading up to that, we can take a lot of those lessons. And so, a lot of our team is like former SpaceX. And so there's a lot of that DNA inside VAST. And so, all of that is allowing us to move much faster. And I think if you look at the DNA of these other efforts, it's very different, right? It's a lot of it is like former NASA or former like big aerospace, and so they kind of like have a different approach to this. And I think that's one of the things that will set us apart. And the other is just the we've been lucky to be able to kind of like not worry about the funding cycle so much. Like this is basically like funded all the way through Haven One, and so we don't have to like pause and like try to get funding and like try to appeal to investors along the way. And that's allowed us to say like really focus on what our goal and like trying to get there. And I think that's a huge leg up actually. So
Max, before I turn it over to you, I actually think, Jed, that's a really good point. The funding part, meaning that you don't have to worry until Haven One, because I actually think one of SpaceX's biggest strengths that isn't talked about as much as some of the more obvious ones is the fact that the employees don't have to worry about funding, and it's a very, very powerful ally to have when your employee doesn't have to wonder, hey, is my stock, is my company going away, or am I going to get to this point, or what? There's a variety of different questions you can ask yourself as an employee if your company has to come back into market every 6 months, which unfortunately a lot of these capital intensive businesses in the industry have to. And I think one of SpaceX's biggest advantages is that their employees can sit. They all they have to worry about is like delivering the product at a crazy timeline, right? And I think that's a huge advantage. But Max, over to you. I'm sure you have some things to add.
And to correct on that, I think that's true of SpaceX today with Starlink. But the early days, I can tell you that fighting to close a round and deliver a milestone or get a payment from NASA to survive are well documented. So they definitely had that
Yes.
survival need more than once, which actually works great. And so it's pretty amazing. And I'll get back to competitors that. That's one of the things that makes VAS very unique is that funding through Haven One. But we also need to become a viable business, and that means profitability. And we also need to bring investors into our board and into our family of trust and leadership. And so, sometime before Haven One, we will definitely be in the market. Sometime between now and the end of next year, and get some financial, investor that can kind of support the growth. As we transition to revenue from NASA, and obviously we will need more resource at that time. In terms of competitor, to be a bit more specific, Orbital Reef and Starlab, are both appearing to us as doing mostly paper engineering for their phase one contract and waiting to really win this award from the government, from NASA, before really building a space station. And so that's one different, that's our second differentiator is our strategy. We are building Haven One with $0 from the US government, $0 from NASA. And I don't think they are. And so in terms of Axiom, they are actually doing some hardware. They've flown to the ISS. But in their case, the differentiation is the architecture they have. Their plan is to build a module. The current date, I think it was originally 24, now it's 26 publicly. But their plan is to build a module that doesn't have all the capability and links to the ISS. We think that approach, first, is a lot more complicated because you need to certify it to approach the ISS. So it's like a dragon, basically, or at least like a Cygnus you need to birth. So we'll see how the timeline fare with that complexity and the safety involved with that. But also, that's not really a space station, right? And so they have to wait until they add a few modules, and then they separate from the ISS and they have all the systems at a much later date. So in terms of the only ones, if you look at building an actual space station that can have a crew visit it, a free flyer, the ISS is on its own a free flyer, an alternative US free flyer, and doing it before winning in 2026 the award, we are the only one. Right? And the only question is, will we be able to execute successfully and safely with the resource that Jed has provided? We're very confident of that, but obviously that's how the market is looking at us, right? They're saying, at first when we announced it, they were like, "Oh, that's really ambitious. Yeah, we don't really believe it." Every time we show evidence, everybody's taking us more seriously. It's quite fun to watch, and I think as we will do it, the change will be material in the way the U.S. government will decide how to pick the partner they have to build space station.
how big of an advantage is it to be first in this market? We've known, and Jed, obviously you've seen this on the software side. Being first sometimes always isn't the best. It's certainly happened, but in this specific case, like given sort of the uniqueness of the market and the customer base, like how important do you think it is to be first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's cool to be first just because like it's a historical fact, a feat, right? Like we would be the first commercial space station. That's cool to have, in the vast Wikipedia. But I mean, I think for us, I think it's more important that like we want the culture of like doing things at a rapid pace. Like I think most people at the company don't want to wait until 2030 to launch something. It just ends up being a very different organization. And so I think it's like uh, for the team, it's like culturally more important than it is for like some sort of like selling point, at least in my view. But I don't know, Max.
Yeah,
Um,
for us, there's not really being first, but until we put Heaven One up there and we have a crew open the hatch and come back home to their family, are we really a space station company? I don't think so. And so it's nothing to do with being first. It's to be a space station company. We just have to do that safely as quickly as we can. It just happens that we'll be the first commercially to do it. If you look at the history, we're not the first group of engineers to build space station modules, right? And the big difference there is we're trying to do it 5 times lower cost and 5 times faster. And then that will give us all the intellectual property, a functioning company and functioning engineering process to, I believe, build anything, right? You want it bigger, you want it more capable, just a matter of cash and time. But it's no longer a question like, can this group of people really do this? You retire that risk basically at that point.
Do you believe that the market is large enough to sustain multiple station providers? And I don't mean 50 years from now, right, where you can paint a very optimistic viewpoint of how much activity we're doing in space and multiple orbiting platforms, et cetera. I mean, in the next 10 years, do you believe the market's large enough to sustain multiple providers?
So if you look, in the long term as the LEO economy build and thrive, including in space manufacturing, absolutely, especially on a global basis, there should be more than two and potentially, 10 space station orbiting Earth and some near the moon and beyond. If you look at now, can the U.S. government, can the economy afford, 3 copies of the ISS? We would say at this scale, I think we know we cannot. But I think it's really important for the U.S. government before down selecting a vendor to build a NASA space station, a CLD, to really test at least 2 providers. It'll be the responsible thing, and to do it before the ISS is deorbited in 2030. And we absolutely believe that, even maybe within the current CLD NASA budget and definitely within the US government ability, if they wanted to grow that budget, we can afford 2 single module experimental, simple space station in addition to the ISS, and then down select one and build a much larger one and invest more after. So our view is there should be 2 at least in the initial stage. And then, maybe it will be reasonable if the LEO economy is not grown to what we hope it will, to focus on one at that point.
So we talk to many investors, and the number one topic that investors have asked us about over the last year or two has been launch. The second most asked about topic in sub industry or subsector is space stations. So I maybe from your guys' perspective, just because we do have a very sizable investor sort of listenership, what is the most common misconception from investors around investing in space stations that you'd want to address right now, right? And I think Jed, you're in a unique vantage point, right? Because you too are a very significant investor in a couple different space companies. So maybe talk a little bit about what are some misconceptions that you've noticed about the way investors think about space stations.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Since we this is all self-funded, so I haven't really talked to many investors about space stations in particular, just because I haven't been pitching anyone. So I would just kind of have to imagine what they would have issue with or be confused about. I mean, honestly, like I think the scale of it will be off-putting for folks because, like as you pointed out, it's like hugely capital intensive. It's one of these things where, uh, and it's also very new. Like there hasn't been a commercial station before, so it's kind of unclear the amount of demand there will be outside of NASA and other folks. And so we can kind of project it based on a little bit of data, but there's not that much yet. So it is sort of a leap of faith. But that said, I think. I think once you start to dig in, it's pretty compelling. There obviously is demand from like if you just look at like the things that Jared Isaacman are doing and like a lot of other folks, there is demand for like private individuals to want to go to space for various reasons, and there's and as Max is kind of hinting at, like there could be these manufacturing breakthroughs that will need need humans in the loop, like the kind of the stuff that Varda is working on, like if they develop some sort of material that is good to build in zero G, like you probably will want a station to help them out with that. I think you probably need stations around like the moon if we're going to do more stuff in Artemis, like like Elon's Mars ambitions. He doesn't really talk about it, but really you would want stations somehow in that loop somehow. I mean, a station is just going to be much nicer to live on than inside Starship. So I think as just kind of the space economy like develops in general, human habitation is going to be key, right? If we want to participate in it. So, I don't know if you have a better answer than that.
Yeah, and if you look at the short-term market, basically like project that we have won a multi-billion-dollar contract over many years to have NASA as our anchor customer. I think that's a pretty easy decision to then have that as a baseline foundation for investment, and then obviously everything else is the upside: the international government, the private individual, and the in space manufacturing and research. And so I think the investment market is being asked to choose the winner. And I would say, as we will start this conversation, as Jed mentioned, we are focused on execution, which is bringing interest from the investment community. But that's the thing. We have to be seen, or whoever will win, as the de facto winner. In the uncertainty makes it difficult because some of these space station companies, which are just doing PowerPoint engineering to please NASA in anticipation of a bid. Maybe they're building a window on the side, maybe they're doing this, but they're not actually building products or real technology beyond design and paper. If they don't win CLD, I don't believe they will exist after that day. And so that's pretty much all or nothing. So we're obviously trying to de-risk that by building one with $0 from NASA, which makes the odds that we can be operating without winning it much greater. But I think that's that. It's some of the skepticism that you speak to more of them than we do. But it's probably if I knew it was the winner, I probably wouldn't be thinking about it so hard. And I can't I can't predict yet who is going to win. So we hope to make that choice easy and obvious, but we need to continue to execute for that to happen.
Interestingly enough, what I hear the most is not questions around technical feasibility. What I hear the most is around questions around the market. And I know we've addressed some of those today, but the biggest question I get is who's the customer here? Who's gonna buy this product? Who needs to be in microgravity? Why is that a big market? I think that's actually by far the biggest thing that I hear. I want to talk about SpaceX real quick. So you have a pretty interesting partnership with SpaceX. It feels to me like it could be from a certain perspective be viewed as a competitive advantage, having this unique relationship with what SpaceX is doing with Crew Dragon. Can you talk a little bit about the SpaceX's desire to partner with you guys and how that sort of formed and developed?
Yeah, so we, when we started the Haven 1 program, and our intention is not just to build a space station that can have humans, is to bring humans. And, you could launch Haven 1 on multiple of rockets if you want to overpay and if you want a lot of risk and delays. So Falcon 9 is the easy choice and the most economical. But then when it comes to bringing people to your space station, right now Boeing is not up and running, and we have concerns about how commercial they are in terms of price and notice time before they fly. If you call SpaceX and you say, I need a flight to Haven 1 in less than 1 year and I need to train this crew, a year, easy. a little bit less than 1 year, they'll probably do it. And there's just nothing like it. And right now, as a US company, there's only one crewed vehicle you can buy from. If you add to that, we obviously are aligned with the Mars mission and the long term of not just making money for the sake of it, but helping humanity expand obviously beyond Earth, and the fact that we are building our roadmap based on Starship. Um, it's a good idea to be as close as we can to SpaceX, and so that's our intentional strategy, is to be as close as they will let us be, and we see them as friend, and we are building on their platform. And so the first thing we did is do a launch deal, a launch partnership. It's documented as such that for Falcon 9 and Dragon. The next thing we did is the Starlink deal with the first one to have done that and really knocked on that door and got that deal done. And I hope we'll do a lot more. And so some of it is in discussion. I can't speak about, but I definitely hope we will be as close as we can to the only human space flight company anyway that we can and should work with.
Can you share more about the product roadmap beyond Haven 1? And how, if at all, do you kind of envision SpaceX's involvement there? And I know you mentioned you can't talk about some of those things, so maybe you can't talk about it, but to the extent that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, originally the goal was, okay, we want humans living for long periods of time in space, right? And so in order to do that, in order to really live for longer than a year, you need artificial gravity. So kind of the original concept was this sort of stick-like station where you connect several modules together end to end, and you end up with like this 100-meter long stick, and then you spin this thing, and that gives you like kind of Earth-like gravity at the ends, right? And so that's still a target we're going for. I mean, obviously there's like many interim steps to get there, but I think ultimately, if we want, first thousands of people living in space and like really to open up like for living there for long periods of time, you need some structure like this. Otherwise, it's just not possible, right? And so yeah, obviously the first step is Haven 1. Then we are going to hopefully like design some stuff that will hopefully meet the requirements of CLD, and then kind of grow. And then these things are all modular, so you can kind of like hopefully stick them together and like slowly build the system as you've done with ISS, right? And so that's kind of a rough shape of what we're going for, but it's still a little ways off.
Yeah, and you have the artificial gravity space station on one end. You have Haven 1 on the other, and then the Haven 2 and Haven 3. We have on our website you can check the roadmap page. We talk about Haven 2 will be a Starship-based single module, but we're still looking at this. So to be clear, though, we have not unveiled yet our CLD architecture on NASA's NASA approved or certified space station and bid. We will eventually. And so that will be called Haven 2. So the roadmap is evolving, not both end. We're very focused on Haven 1. That's what 90% of the people here, or 99% of the 400 people we have advanced. Will be about 650 by the end of the year, 800 by the time we fly. And then the middle piece, which is really a station that is built on what we've learned so far, but also on what NASA needs. That's the piece that we are keeping a little secret for now. Call it Haven 2. So.
Right. How dependent are you on Starship timelines? If Starship, for whatever reason, is delayed, do you see that poking a hole in sort of the plans for what's after Haven 1?
Originally that was true, but when we pivoted to Haven 1, that's no longer the case, right? I mean, now we have this module that fits inside Falcon 9. Like building the first one is definitely the hardest. So like if Starship's delayed and we want to do more Falcon 9 size modules, that will be easy for us to keep making those, right? So I think the downside is it's just more expensive, but that can be dealt with, right? So.
And on the crewed side, obviously there's two sides to Starship, right? The ability to launch an uncrewed space station and deploy it, and then there is the ability to bring however tens of people to a space station and have an unprecedented volume. Clearly the crewed version of Starship, beyond HLS, which the crew won't be re-entering with Starship or leaving Earth with Starship. It's a little ways off. I think probably SpaceX or Elon would still admit that. But the the satellite version of Starship, their priority is Starlink, launching the largest Starlink satellite. But we see that coming pretty soon. That doesn't seem to be a risk in our roadmap there. And so you could have a Starship launch space station combined with a Dragon flight for the crew. That's a very likely architecture for a while. But we're also not precluding launching more Falcon space station built on what we've learned from Haven 1. So that's the piece we are figuring out internally.
Do you believe that Starship will ever be converted into a space station? Do you see that as a risk?
Yeah, SpaceX has bid originally, I believe, on the original CLD, and has bid on this contract CCSC2 with a concept that's public of a Starship space station, like more like the shuttle goes with all the experiment for 6 months and come back together, and that's a very interesting concept. We don't see that specific concept competing directly with us, and yes, it's possible that SpaceX will be a formidable competitor in the CLD procurement. But we're willing to take that risk, and we'll see what happens. But it's there's other potential outcome that we're also hoping for.
Yeah, and for the record, I certainly don't believe that just because there's a big competitor or potential competitor out there with a lot of money, it doesn't mean they're going to be able to do it, nor are they going to be able to do it as well as you. But I have to ask. So, guys, I want to talk for a second about fundraising. So you've mentioned that Haven 1 is fully funded, or excuse me, VAST is fully funded through Haven 1. Maybe talk a little bit about how investors, and Jed, maybe this is a question directly for you, how should investors think about your involvement from a fundraising perspective? Obviously, you've helped fund the business through now. How are you thinking about yourself as a participant in the business long term?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously super passionate about it. I spent like a pretty significant fraction of my net worth on it and time, and so like I want it to succeed. I think I would suspect that investors would view it positively. Like, I mean, I want to back this thing. Like, I'm bringing other people on board, not so much just because I need to, but more because I think it will expand our network, and it's just good to have other people kind of on your team, essentially, right? So I feel like investors should view that positively. Yeah.
So if we think about sort of the general economics of space stations, the estimates are that the ISS costs somewhere between $100 to $150 billion, right, to build, depending on who you ask and what they include. But the point is, it's at least $100 billion. Now, I've no doubt that what you're building is a tiny fraction of that. But can you give us a little sense of what the economics look like for something like Haven 1, or anything sort of in general on how you're thinking about economics, or how investors should think about economics?
Yeah. So the economics depend a lot on, your customer base, obviously, but also on your ECLSS, your life support system. Like the life support on Haven 1 is all what we call open loop. So everything is expendable. Like, we have to keep bringing up new water and oxygen and CO2 scrubbing and all like that. And that makes it where it's pretty borderline. But if you can close that loop where you get, because basically what you're putting up there is like a certain number of days on orbit, right? And if you can extend that number of days on orbit longer, then the thing becomes more and more economically viable, right? And so Haven 1 now has a roughly 40 days of 160 days of people days that can exist there. If you close the ECLSS loop, then you can easily double that, or way more than double that, and then all of a sudden it's extremely economically viable, right? So really a big factor in this equation is just like how good your ECLSS system can be, and which is obviously what we're spending a lot of our time working on. So like I said, the Haven 1 will be open loop, just because we wanted this MVP kind of concept where we just got something up as soon as possible, but that's the thing that we're focusing on as much as we can after that. So.
Yeah, and if you look at the main cost to visit and spend time on a space station is transportation. So firstly, we need and hope the Crew Dragon or the Starship in the future, the seat to bring you to orbit and dock and come back on the parachute or propulsively landed. We need that cost to go down. If you look at beyond that, and what we charge customers, that's the lion's share, the transportation cost, and then we have a price per day per crew. there. And as Jed mentioned, when we open loop, it's finite, or we have to bring through a cargo at great expense more of these consumable. But as we evolve towards closed loop, which has been achieved mostly on the ISS, the time on the station is less of a finite resource and a lot more affordable. In terms of building the modules, the first module we are building, we're not really the expense. It's 2 to 3 years of a company that will average, call it 700 people, and nearly 200,000 square feet of facilities. You can kind of do the quick math, and so the cost is all of that. But what we are really doing is building the first one. If you look at Haven 2, the next module, I mean, it's trivial, right? It's literally raw material and some of the technician and team there. The launch cost of the module on a Falcon 9 reusable, that's a public price, is in the 60 million ish, right, between 60 and 70 million. And hopefully with Starship that will go down. So that's not really a big factor, the launch cost of the module. So the economics keep getting better as we pop out or build module that are based on the tooling and the technology we've invested on Haven 1. And transportation is really what we need for the cost to go down. There's other things like solar power. So for example, on Haven 1, we decided for speed to go traditional with multi-junction cell, space solar array, basically. And they are pretty expensive, and they're not built in-house and vertically integrated. So whether it's Haven 2 or 3, we're going to need to have much lower cost solar power using terrestrial cells, something similar to what Starlink has achieved, and that will keep reducing the cost. Everything else is just, pretty much everything else is, microchips and raw material and machine time and people time to integrate it and test it. It's actually not that expensive if you vertically integrate.
So we've spent a lot of time on this show talking about commercial opportunities, especially in microgravity environments, everything from in-space manufacturing to various types of R&D work that's taking place. Obviously, that also goes into government and NASA's what NASA's been doing on the ISS, since the late '90s. But what is is there a military opportunity that you guys are thinking about, or is sort of top of mind? Space at the end of the day, many of the U.S. adversaries are building in space because of their belief that it's sort of the ultimate high ground. But I don't actually I have not spent nearly enough time talking to folks about what that looks like, and I'm curious if you have spent some time thinking about what that opportunity looks like.
I think it's a little sensitive, but there are definitely derivative of space station that can be used by branches of the military, and we are part of this conversation or aware. You also have the more basic side, is that the Space Force has never sent anyone to space in uniform. That should probably happen one day, and it can't happen to the ISS. Because it cannot be militarized, so that's a good thing for space station. The Italian Space Force is also a customer of has flown to the ISS on a commercial basis, and so that's already today. But in terms of crewed platform in low Earth orbit, the moon, geo, that are crewed by military personnel for military objective against adversaries. That might be part of the equation. That's certainly not our focus, but we are part of these discussions.
Yeah, and Max, since Launcher was acquired, are there any parts of the business that are sort of being utilized within the vast ecosystem?
I mean, a lot of the teams, we had about 40 people at Vast and about 80 at Launcher. So part of it was also seeding a lot of the teams, whether it's in software and other area, GNC. Manufacturing, we actually grew it out of everything that Launcher had, and obviously, brought a lot of new talent and grew the team and the facility. There's different parts, but mostly the people and some small part of the technology, in avionics and software, for example.
So as we sort of close out here, I have a two-part question for both of you. I'd love to get both of your answers on this, which is, what keeps you up at night as you're building Vast, and what excites you the most about what you're building? Jed, we can start with you.
Sure. Let's see. I mean, what keeps me up at night? I think, like space is very hard. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. It's a very complex system. I mean, I think, like we'll launch it, and something can go wrong with the launch. I mean, it hasn't happened in a long time to Falcon 9, but you never know. And then like something can go wrong on orbit. I mean, there's just a lot of complexity here, and we really only have like a couple of shots to get it right. I mean, we could probably do it again if the first Haven one fails, but it would be a setback for sure. So it's nothing particular. It's just kind of this vague, like it's a high risk endeavor, right? And so that kind of like angst, I guess. But I think we have the right team. Like everything is moving along. Like the technology is awesome. Like I think we're doing all the right things, and it's very encouraging. I mean, like what excites me is just the fact that this is like every day, every time I go down to LA and look at the facility, it's just like more and more real. Like it's just like this is actually happening. Like we have this Pathfinder structure that we built, and the full structure is coming together. Like it's just. It will be amazing to have, a vast station like orbiting the Earth where we'll be able to go and look at it in the night sky. That will be awesome. So, yeah, the whole endeavor is very exciting to me. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. What keeps me up at night. We have many people that have been on console and responsible for people in orbit. We have our astronaut advisor Drew Fustel and Garrett Reisman that themselves have done EVA, and Drew has repaired the Hubble telescope and has been on console, has been in space while some of the people that are on our team were on console. And so what I'm hearing, firsthand, I've never experienced that as a responsibility as a CEO. But we obviously have an incredible opportunity once we'll see our crew and we'll meet them and their families. And once they'll be on orbit for these 10 days, I don't know how much sleep Jed and I and some of the key team members are going to get. And so it's more of a responsibility. It keeps me at night, but it's a responsibility that, a lot of the choice we make now can impact the outcome and the safety. So thinking about that, but also looking forward to that responsibility and making sure we do the right thing. And it's something very special with human space flight, and very, satellite definitely doesn't have that. And satellite are pretty cool. You're operating a machine in space, but this is a totally different level. And then, what I'm looking forward to is I keep dreaming that I will be able to afford, or another reason to go and visit one of the product I helped build with the team. So in space. So that definitely, when it gets tough, I'm like, you're the closest you've ever been to go to space. So just keep doing it. So
yeah.
So that I'm keeping that dream alive.
Well, you actually answered my last question, but Jed, I'm going to ask you. I'm sure you have plans and interest to go to space. When do you think you'll make your trip up with VAST?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully soon. Yeah, I haven't really set a date yet, or thought too much about it. And the first step is just I just want to get the thing up and working and viable, right? And then I'll start thinking about that kind of stuff. But, yeah,
fair enough.
But yeah, it will be amazing. So.
All right. Well, you guys are doing amazing stuff. Thank you guys for being on the show. Really appreciate it, and excited to have you back on as we get closer and closer to summer 2025 and Haven 1 launch.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks,
Mo.
Mo.
Thanks again, Mo.
Thanks, guys.